one. Greetings, everyone, here in World Regional Geography class, or anybody who's out there just hanging out on Twitch who tuned in to this little broadcast of ours, the Boyer broadcast here on Twitch. As always, before I go too much further, can I get a shout out? Can I get a shout out from someone in the e-room? I'm sorry, the chat room, that you can both see and hear me loud and clear. Says Dark Knight 50. Welcome back, Dark Knight. Rod Botto is in the hizzle. Mary Handy's up in the hizzle. Is Blues Subaru's back up in this hizzle? Can both hear and see me. Thank you all for tuning in for yet another edition of the online office hour for World Regions, Geog 1014, here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies. Although there was a bit of a disappointment last Saturday, was it not? And how many of you got caught in that flash flood? What the hell was that all about? Wow. Oh, we also got some other folks checking in here. M Dog up here saying can see and hear. Cheesecake, Chessy Cake, Chisik says so excited. Plaid Katie's up in the hizzle. First time chatter from Jin Wonk 22. Hello, Jin, and thank you for tuning in and your first time chatting. Mike Madical's up here saying happy Monday with an awesome Japanese style octopus. I think that's what it is. Macman in the hizzle saying hello. Welcome back, Macman. M-Dog got caught in the freaking highway was Rod Botto. I had to stop on the shoulder because I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. Hello to Jake Wangler, a.k.a. Jake Wrangler, up in the house. And Dark Knight was too busy underground to get caught up in the rain. Too busy underground. Would that be the London Underground, the pub, or the underground room of the cellar? Yeah, that was a doozy of a Saturday game that turned into a flash flood. And, of course, we lost in a heartbreaker. That was sad. I was hoping for a clean sweep this season, undefeated. Already stymied in week 2. But such is life in the world of sports, in the wide, wide world of sports. Let's see. RJ Bacon up in here saying, what's up, dog? The bacon is back. Is Blue Subaru says we saw a car in a tree and a BMW sideways smash into a wall on 460 out near Christiansburg. Car in a tree? How did I not see any pictures of that? Calzone VT says drove through Merrimack. Was all flooded. 10 out of 10 would do it again. Okay. Well, that sums up the insanity of the weekend. Hope everybody is doing well, survived the flash flooding event, and survived the football game, however sad it ended, and that you were off to a wicked great start here in week 4. Is it week 4 already? What week is this, my friends? Is this truly week 4 of class? I think it is. But somebody give me a confirmation on that. I think it's week 4. And what all are you studying? Rod Botto gives me a confirm. CM703 gives me a confirm on week 4. And what are you all studying this week? Is it economics? Is it world economics, or are we on to world politics yet? Is Blue Subaru's friend hydroplaned driving to New Jersey and smacked into a wall. I'm sorry to hear about that. I hope they're okay. A first-time chatter from Lizzie C. 44 that says it is week 4. Calzone and CM and PSI Whirlwind and 2TEF and Lizzie C. and Cheesecake all agree that it is world economy that you are learning about this week. And what about the film? What was the film this week? I think it was another doozy. Actually, I like all the films that we use in class. That's why I use them. And I think it's another crowd pleaser. Seems like maybe it's Motorcycle Diaries. Yes, thank you for the shout out on Motorcycle Diaries. Great flick. always makes most people want to get a motorcycle and drive across country, or drive across continent, as it were, no matter what continent it is, be it South America, North America, or one of the old world continents as well. It is a fantastic travel film, which is why I use it for this class. And it's a fantastic travel film based on real events with a real historic figure in its formative years. I think it's a quite good film. I hope that you all enjoyed it as well. I do got a first-time chatter from Brian Cabrera saying, yo, what up? Thanks for your first-time chat, Brian. You're too kind to tune in and do your first chat. Tutef says, I was going to ask you about your thoughts on the line being built, I believe, in Saudi Arabia. The line. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Tutef. Give me a bit more details on the line. And Chesaky says, fave so far. Oh, good. Fave so far. Chesaky also says, my friend backpacked the route in the film this summer. Wow! Wow! What a great idea. Here you go. Extra credit. Anybody that backpacks, that takes the rest of the semester off and backpacks the route taken by Che in South America gets an automatic A in this class. Is Blue Subaru says, Motorcycle Diaries is making me want to keep planning my little dream trip across North America the summer after graduation. I heartily encourage that, Blue Subaru. And of course, do it in your Blue Subaru. Everyone should tour this great continent as well before you get down to touring the South American continent. Or you know what? Switch it up either way, but at some point in your life, all of you should do cross country multiple times across the great continent of North America. And be sure to visit all 3 countries as well. Although just staying in the contiguous 48 states would keep you quite busy for a whole summer of tours. But try to get down to Mexico and up to our Chile friends, the Canucks in Canada. Tutef says, yeah, it's a linear city that has no cars, 110 miles long, 1 mile wide. Oh, super futuristic. Got announced last summer. At first I've heard about that too, Tef. I'm going to have to look that one up. Send me an article or two if you have it. I believe you sent me a bunch of articles last week as well. So thank you for that. But I'll always take more because I read the articles that people send me. I don't always respond in a timely manner to everything because I get like 500 emails a day. But I do eventually read all this good stuff that's in those emails. Okay, so what I was going to do tonight, as always, I'll just hang out and answer questions that you have about anything or anything happening in the world. But because I was a slacker, I told you all last week that I was going to try to do a Friday podcast just on African coups. But then I forgot. Wine Lab was our bar here, Wine Lab, was slammed. I totally forgot it was another football Saturday, so it was chaos everywhere. And because it was a football Saturday, I also kind of assumed that most of you were probably already partying on Friday, so I didn't know how many people would tune in for a Friday podcast. And I just got way behind in 10 million things, so I never made it back in front of the computer. But if you all tell Plaid Katie right now, you can direct message her in this chat room and tell her to make sure Boyer does one this Friday and that you'll definitely tune in this Friday. Then I'll make it a point to really try to get back to doing a full one this Friday. But having said that, I figured I'd give you like a half a podcast right now on a different topic, that being the G20. But I'm sorry, back to Chesapeake, who says, what are your hopes for COP28, United Nations Conference on Climate Change, being held in Dubai and funded by the world's largest oil supplier? Yeah, that one is a tricky one. Honestly, Chesapeake, I like to be optimistic. But the world doesn't quite seem ready to truly embrace trying to cut back on fossil fuel reliance. There is still quite a bit of debate between the rich countries and the poor countries, between the global north and the global south, between the oil producing countries and the oil importing countries. Everybody's still kind of at odds. And of course, I am specifically, when I talk about global climate change, I try not to even use those words. So the COP28 conference on climate change in and of itself is inflammatory to some. So to me, I just like to think of it more as decreasing reliance on fossil fuels, because that's not terribly offensive to anybody. Saying let's all get together and try to decrease reliance on fossil fuels because they are heavily polluting. They're heavily polluting to the environment, to the air, and our whole kind of planet. Those are mostly indisputable facts and approaches to the global climate crisis. Again, some people don't even believe in the global climate crisis because it could be argued that global climate changes all the time, and it does. That's why it's easily arguable. But to say, hey, this is really polluting stuff, we should probably try to reduce our reliance on it. No one can really argue against that. I mean, some will, but there's still a lot of problems trying to get all the world's countries on the same page with decreasing reliance on fossil fuels. I think the biggest one is countries that have fossil fuels who rely heavily on selling them are still going to keep fighting tooth and nail, maybe to the destruction of the planet, because that's their bread and butter. What the hell are they going to do if nobody wants fossil fuels anymore? Maybe you're thinking, maybe in your head you're thinking, oh, he's talking about all the OPEC members or all of the countries in the Middle East that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. I am, but don't forget that there's lots of other countries in Africa in particular that have some resources of fossil fuels who are miffed that they are not going to be able to exploit their own energy resources that they have and make money off of them like all the other rich countries have done over the last 200 years. So it's a bit of African countries that have not been able to utilize all of their resources yet in full and get rich from them, and also the richer oil exporting countries that do make tons of money that are hesitant to get on board with getting off fossil fuels. Then you also have countries like China and, quite frankly, the United States, which both have tremendous amounts of coal. And so even these countries, the United States, not so much right now, but if Donald Trump gets reelected, you can fill in the blank there. But China is actually the biggest producer of CO2 right now because it's heavily reliant on coal, of which it has a bunch. So even they're a little hesitant to say, hey, we're just going to get off of all this stuff because it's what's been boosting up their economy for 50 years. And you have places like Indonesia and I'm trying to think what other country I just read about recently that has actually increased coal consumption because it's readily available and cheap, and there are countries that are trying to become rich. And so that's the main crux of the argument. I don't think anybody anymore would say, hey, pollution is good, we should keep doing it, but it is a tougher call for countries that are still growing. And they're saying, hey, look, if you want us, the countries that ain't rich yet, to not use fossil fuels and not even use the fossil fuels that we have, then somebody's got to pony up and give us money to not do that. Kind of the same way that Brazil in times past and present has said, hey, if you guys want us to protect the rainforest and not use any of it, then somebody's got to pony up because we're using this stuff to make money. We're cutting down trees to make money, and all countries want to make money so they can give stuff to their peoples. And so Brazil in the past has said, hey, we'll stop cutting down trees, but somebody's got to pony up the money that we would get from these trees so that we can get stuff for our citizens. And you're going to hear that same argument from African countries, and again, even countries that are better off or richer, who are saying, but we're not completely rich yet, so we want to keep going. That's what I think the major debates are about. Most of the rich countries who have already gotten rich off of using polluting fossil fuels for centuries, they've seen the light, but that don't mean that they're all about let's get off fossil fuels, but that's because they've already done their share of polluting and they don't need it anymore. So to me, that's the big bone of contention in today's world, is not so much as global warming happening. Of course it is, but it's more, is it can it be related exactly to fossil fuels? It probably can, but again, that's a contentious issue. But even those are sideline issues anymore. It's like, hey, what about the countries that have this fuels? They're not ready to give them up yet. And so that's where we're at right now. And so COP28, I mean, all the countries that don't want to get off fossil fuels right this second are going to say, hey, we'll do it, but for money. And where's that money coming from? And so the rich countries, mostly the global north, is trying to figure out, well, how much of this money can we pony up? How much can we pull off of out of our own coffers to give to the global south, to the less developed, less rich countries of the global south, in order for them to not pollute as much in the future, or to wean themselves off of oil that they have never even fully, completely embraced in the past. So, sorry to rant on for so long on such a simple question, Chesapeake, but that to me is the reason why I'm not more optimistic, because I don't think right this second, the worst is still yet to come for changing global climate. And there are many who are still convinced that super hurricanes and super typhoons that are occurring right now, a lot of people are not convinced that's because of global warming. Again, it's quite easy to kind of make these arguments, but the bigger issue is who's going to pay for all this, and who's going to pay for everybody to get off oil. Fossil fuels, I should say. That's the sticking point, and I'm not sure that the climate crisis is bad enough yet to make the rich countries pony up enough for the lesser rich countries. Does that make sense? So hopefully we'll keep moving forward, but I think the parties are still too far apart at this current juncture. Ames says hello. Hello, James. Only here for the Plaidcast is back in the hizzle. Have you already discussed BRICS as a follow-up to 2 weeks ago? No worries if you covered it in class. I have not, but on that, only here for the Plaidcast. Let's get to a Plaidcast. So what I wanted to do tonight, although it's already 8:18, I've already burned up 18 minutes hanging out with you awesome people, because, again, it's the office hour. It's what we're here to do. But I'll give you some more food for thought. How about that? And what caught my eye this last weekend, besides the flash flooding in Blacksburg, Virginia, was this whole thing about a G20 meeting that happened. Did anybody hear about this G20 meeting, the G20 summit in New Delhi? It was kind of a big deal. James, obviously, says yes, he's heard of that. A Calzone is keeping tabs on the G20. So while we were watching a football game here in our part of the world and getting rained on, M-Dog says he saw it on the TV at McComas. Awesome. While we were getting rained on, a giant summit was happening. I say giant, it was 20 strong, was happening in New Delhi, India, under the tutelage or guidance or host of one Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, obviously, of India. And it kind of was a big deal, and I'm just going to quickly go over some stuff and field questions from you all of things that I thought were kind of interesting. First off, what is the G20? The G20 is this grouping. We haven't gotten to international organizations yet in this class, although the previous students who've already taken this class know all about international organizations. But I'll just give you a little heads up about the G20 before you get to it in class, in Chapter 6, in the readings, and in a lecture of 2 or 3 weeks from now. So the G20 is one of these global groups comprised mostly of the 20 of the world's largest economies. It was formed up in 1999, but they actually really didn't get together with heads of state till 2008. And what I mean by that is it was originally formed to bring the kind of most influential, biggest, most important economies to they would get together to discuss the international economic and financial stability. And the people that went to those meetings, starting in 1999, were finance ministers and econ folks. It was not the presidents and prime ministers. However, because of the global catastrophic economic meltdown of 2008, I know many of you weren't paying attention back then, but it was kind of a big deal. It was dangerously close to becoming a world depression, but it was a worldwide phenomenon in 2008, the global financial crisis that started right here at home in the United States of America, based on crappy stock speculations and hiding crappy investments in pyramid schemes, basically, that became unraveled in 2008. If you want the skinny on exactly all the details of how that happened in 2008, go watch this awesome film called The Big Short. We actually referenced it last week. If you want to understand what happened and why it imploded the U.S. economy, which then rippled out and imploded a bunch of other economies in Europe and the world, go watch The Big Short. But after, when that implosion was occurring, the G20 became the main forum for all of the biggest economies to get together with the actual heads of state, the presidents and prime ministers, to help deal with the crisis. And by and large, most experts and talking heads on TVs did give the G20 credit for heading off the crisis before it completely spiraled out of control. The world was kind of on the precipice of a full-scale, just the world economy falling off a cliff, true free fall. It was very close. And so those states got together and said, holy crap, what can we do? And there was trillions of dollars of aid that was passed around and figured out how to plug holes in different places. And it kind of worked. At least it mostly worked in terms of the whole world economy didn't completely die. All right. Ever since that point, though, that was like the launching off point of heading off that financial crisis, brought the world leaders together, and they said, you know what, we should start doing this every year. So ever since 2008, there has been a global meeting of the G20 where heads of state from all of the 20 show up. I shouldn't just say heads of state, but because one of them is the European Union, so the head of an organization. But back to the chat. Let's see. Emric Taco says, or Mr. Eek Taco says, did you see the ratio of housing price to medium income is actually worse right now than it was in 2008? I have not seen that, Mr. Eek, but I do not doubt it. Only here for the Plaidcast says, I might have misheard, but in case it was a slip of the tongue worth clarifying, it sounded like you referred to Manmohan Singh as current prime minister rather than Narendra. I'm sorry, I did. What was I thinking about? Thank you. Only here for the Plaidcast. I've been doing this so long. I know multiple prime ministers and presidents of different countries. I had Manmohan Singh's image in my head, but obviously, the current prime minister of India is Narendra Modi. Our main man Modi up in the hizzle there in India is the one who hosted this summit that just finished up on, I think it was Friday, Saturday. Finished up on Sunday, but Joe Biden was already out and about going somewhere else that I'll get to in just a second. So back to the G20. What actually is it? It is just a meeting between now heads of states. It is not, there's no headquarters, there's no constitution, there's no bylaws, there's no rules or regulations. It is simply, hey, the biggest economies, we should get together to try to smooth things out as much as possible. Again, mostly for finance and econ, but it's now growing into, hey, let's talk about global climate change and let's talk about cryptocurrency, which they talked about both of those things. And I think it's, at this last meeting, they just talked about those things. And I think it's probably a pretty decent to a really good global institution because unlike the G7, which was way too exclusive and only encompassed the super rich Western democracies, and unlike the United Nations, which constitutes all the countries of the world, This one's more of a work meeting group that can actually get stuff done. And what I mean by that is the United Nations, there's like almost 200 members. They're never going to agree on anything. You will very soon find out how the UN Permanent Security Council works. They're never going to agree on anything. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council have veto power. And by the way, does anybody know who's on the permanent UN Security Council? Who are the permanent members of the UN Security Council? And they all have veto power, which pretty much assures that nothing will ever get done at the UN, because any one of these 5, and they mostly hate each other, will veto anything that the other ones want to do. Chesapeake already up in his list saying USA, Russia, China, France, England. I see CM, US, UK, Russia, China, France. Mac Medical, US, UK, China, Russia, France. US, UK, France, China, Russia. From the one and the only guy. Calzone says he can't type fast enough. Adastra's in there with the right answer. Mac Medical with the right answer. CM703, Chesapeake, all with the right answer. James with the right answer. Very well played. Melted Ice Cream always makes me sad, but also has the right answers. P.S. Whirlwind says, I think those guys said it first. Yes, a whole lot of very rapid-fire correct answers. So already, whether you've taken my class already or not, I can now tell you, thank you, Sadi21, who also has the correct answer. I can now tell you, for those of you who have not seen this lecture yet, that the UN Permanent Security Council members, the P5, consist of China and Russia, which will always veto anything the U.S., the UK and France wants to do, and the US and UK and France, who will always veto anything Russia and China want to do. So that in and of itself leads to a very ineffective United Nations when dealing with very major world problems. It's no diss of the United Nations. They have lots of other committees and things that do good work and do good things and do change the world. But for the major things, this whole entity will never agree on anything. The other side of the spectrum was the G7, which was just the Western countries. It was the Western Club. And it's good that they got together and did stuff, and they still do, but they're a very small portion of the world. And so you have 2 entities, G7 or the entire United Nations, which can't really affect things. You need the G20 somewhere in the middle that says, hey, we're a much more diverse group of countries here. And yes, if we're going to enact global or try to affect global climate change, and we're going to do COP28, I think it's great. We're going to do COP28 at the United Nations. I can tell you already, for reasons I described earlier, it's never going to go anywhere because there's too many parties that disagree on too much. It makes much more sense to talk about COP28 or some sort of global policy on cryptocurrency or the climate or anything. It makes much more sense to start it at the G20. Because if you can't get it through the G20, guess what? It ain't going nowhere, the United Nations either. So if you can get the 20 core big economies to agree to anything, at least it has a fighting chance of getting some sort of legislation or laws or guidelines passed at the United Nations. Does that make sense? So it's almost like the G20, I think, is going to be the premier vetting club for global issues of this century. If you can't get 20 members to agree to something, you're never going to get 200 to agree to it, so why even bother at some point? Again, that's being fairly pessimistic, but I'm just trying to make the point of this is why I believe the G20 is an important institution, and it has been growing. And I didn't even pull up this story, but this would be a test question if I were to give a quiz on this. That the African Union was invited to join it at this meeting. So it's the world's top 19 economies. And by the way, if you look at 20 different places on the internet about what's the biggest economies, you'll get varying answers all over the place. But in general, the top 19 biggest economies and a representative from the European Union. And now they just voted on adding a representative from the African Union. So this becomes a much more diverse grouping that does represent planet Earth a bit better than the G7 ever did and can be much more effective than the United Nations will ever be. Does that make sense? That was well said. Damn it. I should write this shit down. That was very well said when I just said it out loud. Okay. But let me give you some more facts real quick. So 19 countries and now and the EU and now the AU. So it's actually 21. I guess maybe they'll start calling it the G21. I haven't thought about that yet. But these groupings, this grouping of nations now represents 80% of global economic output. 80%, pretty much of GDP of the world is just in these 21 entities. Nearly 75% of global exports are from these 21 entities. And actually, the African Union is not even officially in it yet, so we could just say G20. So even excluding the African Union, just the G20 was 80% of global economic output, 75% of all global exports, and about 60% of the world's population. So over half of the world's humans are at least represented just in this grouping of 20. And again, now if we make it a G21 with Africa, oh Jesus, now we are talking about that might be more like 80% of the world's humans, maybe 85. I have to go do the math on that. So a smaller, tighter body, but much more representative of the world. Now, maybe I should get to what countries specifically. Oh, look, a map, because I love maps. Who doesn't? So the members of the G20 are, in alphabetical order, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, China, Canada. Oh, I flipped those. Let me try again in alphabetical order. Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, and the United Kingdom, along with a representative of the European Union. As you can see just from the map, that's a nice clearinghouse of places from the global north, from the global south, and from a little smattering of everywhere in between. It's got Asian countries, it's got African countries, it's got North American and South American countries, and Australia. So, unlike the G7, which was just the rich predominantly white countries of Europe, America, and Japan got thrown in there for some diversity, this is much more representative of what's happening on planet Earth. That's why I like it more, and that's why it makes more sense to get more voices. Although, again, a tight group. It's only 20, but to get those voices. I did like this graphic a lot, too. Why does the G20 matter? I don't know if you guys can even see this that good on the screen, but this is a great little graphic. I've now mentioned the group of 7 multiple times. I think that probably all of you know who those are, too. But let's see how fast you can type again. Can you list me the G7 countries? And by the way, at one point, it was also called the G8 because the 8th member was Russia. But then Russia got kicked out back in 2014 when they invaded Ukraine the first time, when they invaded the Crimean Peninsula. So the G7 has been around, since World War II? Trying to think when Japan, maybe they didn't officially start meeting till the 70s or 80s. James is the first one in now, who says US, Canada, France, UK, Japan, Italy, Germany. The one and the only guy gets it as well. EW140401 also gets it. Is Blue Subaru nails it. Although Blue Subaru, I don't think, maybe the G7 has a representative of the EU sit in on it as well, but it's not counted as one of the 7, I don't think. Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, United States, that's 7. So yeah, I think you're right, Subaru. I think they do have a rep sitting in on it from the EU, much like the G20 does as well, but it's not counted as part of the 7. Whereas the EU rep is counted as one of the 20. Ooh, we're getting all kinds of good test questions here. Guess I should make a test. Tercity, thank you also for the correct answer. So what I love about this graphic is it shows you, and this is, you guys want some good learning? You want to learn about how the world has changed in just this century? Look at this graphic right here. This graphic is showing you the G20 share of the global economy, but it's also, the bottom line is G7's total gross domestic product combined all together. So check this shizzle out. G20 right now, and it even pops up the numbers, the G20 today represents 78% of global economic output. Let's call it GDP for short. And right this second, just the 7 of the 20 constitute 44%. So cut it in half, all right? Right now the G7's a little more than half of the total G20 GDP / economic output. But look back in the day. Let's go back just to the year 2000. In the year 2000, the G7 was 65% to the G20's 81. So you can see over time, and if we go back further and further in time, we can't go back any further than 1999, really, because that's when the G20 started. But we could, the folks who did this graphic, they did the math and tracked it back further, even though the G20 wasn't a real thing before 1999. But if you go back further and further, say to the end of World War II, let's call it like 1960 or 1970. I'll have to figure out when Japan joined the G7. But if you go back to the moment that Japan joined the G7, this number for G7 total GDP would be more like 80% of world output. I mean, the G7, I used to call them the Great Seven, the Great Rich Seven. They really overwhelmingly had all the money and most of the exports. But that has changed rapidly in the last 20 years. As this graph now demonstrates, the G7 going down in its overall percentage, they're still rich countries. But compared to the other countries, namely China, let's be completely frank here, but also India and also Indonesia, all of these countries have been growing and growing and growing for 20 to 30 years. And the G7, while still rich, not growing as fast. So this little graphic really kind of sums it up beautifully of why a G20 makes so much more sense than a G7 anymore, which the G7 still meets, and they meet for good reason, because they are the G7 richest countries that are democracies, and so they have as a added element of their uniqueness that they are all democracies and they're pro-democracy and they push democracy and free market capitalism. The G20 is not 100% pro-democracy. You have China in there and Russia who are 100% autocratics, and some might even say dictatorial political systems that are not completely all about free market capitalism. So you've got some oddballs in there when it comes to democracy. But the United States and the other G7 countries kind of started to realize, look, we can get together and talk about stuff in our rich democratic club, but we are not as important as every year goes by. We're not as important in terms of overall global economic output. And if we just try to change things and we just make up rules with our 7, we're not going to impact the rest of the world. And if we want to have smooth world financial systems, we actually have to involve these other groups. We can't just keep saying, well, we're in charge of it all. We're just going to make the rules and do what we want, because they're not in charge of it all anymore. Does that make sense? Let me, I think I just got some lights that flashed off. Hang on. Damn auto lighting system in this place gets me every damn time. Okay, so that's the difference between G7 and G20. G20 much more globally diverse, and that's partly because a lot of those other 13 entities that have joined up with the G7 have grown significantly and significantly faster in the last 20 to 30 years than the G7 has. So you can't really make any headway on global financial institutions or global financial problems or global economic problems or even global climate problems or even global cryptocurrency problems unless you have some representation from enough of the world that are now players in this game. That makes sense? This is really shaping up as a nice little podcast, is it not? I mean, I feel like I'm imparting some good knowledge to you. Okay, so like I said, the G20 was originally formed up in 1999, and that was in response to the Asian financial crisis, which none of you were alive for, so I won't go into that. The Asian financial crisis was baby shit compared to the 2008 financial crisis. However, that's why the G20 got started, because China was so big at that time, already such a player. And when it started to tank financially, it caused a ripple effect across Asia, which then had a ripple effect across the world of hurting economies. And so that's when they formed up the G20. They said, hey, the G7 said, hey, we can't fix all this. This started in Asia. And we don't got any Asian members except Japan. So let's expand this group to pull in the players that we can now get together and talk about, oh, we have to fix a financial global thing. Well, we have to have China at the table. So 1999, G20 started in an effort to alleviate the issues of the Asian financial crisis, and then really got more footing in 2008 because of the global financial crisis started in the United States. That's when world leaders started to attend on a regular basis. Now we're all caught up, I think. Now, what happened this weekend? Well, this weekend was, let's see, if they started meeting in 2008, so that was 15 years ago. So this will be the 15th time that we had a meeting. And the meeting with global leaders is, what do you call it? It rotates. It's potluck. So everybody brings a dish, and they sit down and eat some food and talk about world problems. They don't really potluck. I'm sure there are extravagant affairs at this point. So it is a rotating host. And this is, I believe, India's first time hosting the G20. And it was a very big deal for them as their first time hosting, but also because India is an up-and-coming player in its own right, and it really took a lot of pride in hosting this, and it made a lot of headway, and it was kind of a diplomatic coup for them in terms of they accomplished things that other folks actually did not think were going to be able to happen. India pulled off some consensus building and actually some strategic economic building on the sidelines of this meeting. So I'll get to some of this in just a minute. But I have some comments here from Chesapeake, who says, just look, the chief coordinator, Harsh Vandhan Shringla, said it's still G20 as of now when asked about the name change. Thank you, Chesapeake. Man, you guys are awesome. This is like the funnest way to lecture now, because everybody can fact check me and then figure out stuff that I don't know and then add it to the conversation. This is the future of education, my friends. Oh, we got a first time chatter from J.K. Wiat, who says, could sanctions impact who is included in G20, given that the point of sanctions is to reduce a country's economic development? Woo, very good question, J.K., and that is actually very timely, because I will go back to why is India the kind of the big winner of this G20? Well, because they're the hostess with the mostest. They pulled it off, the pomp and circumstance and extravagance in style. But also because it brought all of the countries together kind of in a consensus statement about the Ukraine war. As you might imagine, the United States and all of its allies, which would be all the G7 and a handful of other countries in the G20, are really not happy about Russia invading Ukraine and have been helping Ukraine for over a year and a half now, and wanted to have a harsh condemnation of Russia at this very meeting, because Russia is a member of this group. That didn't happen because China has been subtly backing Russia's play, and so China didn't want to have be a part of a meeting that was going to have a harsh condemnation of Russia either. So before I go any further, this would be another test question. Who did not attend? Which world leaders did not attend this meeting? And the answers are China and Russia did not send their presidents to this meeting. Probably because both of them thought, well, they have their reasons. One reason might be because Vladimir Putin has a arrest warrant out for him from the International Criminal Court, And so technically, India is a member of the ICC. So technically, Putin could have been arrested in India. So Putin's not really, he probably would not have been, but he's not going to risk it. He's not, no one's going to risk a public debacle where they try to arrest Vladimir Putin. So old Putin didn't go, mainly because he's against the West. He thought a condemnation was going to happen. He thought all of the G20 might gang up on him for his invasion of Ukraine, but also because he could have been arrested. China didn't want to go for perhaps the same reasons, not because they would get arrested, but because they also didn't want to become a part of a G20 that was building a case against Russia and condemning Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. However, China also has ulterior motives why they didn't attend, and I'll get to those in just a second. So what did India pull off that was such a major coup when it came to the very issue at hand that I'm talking about, that J.K. Wyatt brought up of, don't some of the G20 countries have sanctions against Russia? Yeah, like a majority of them, I think, including the United States and all of its G7 allies and its other allies. And so the United States really wanted to stick it to Russia even harder, perhaps, or at least have some sort of consensus build within the G20 saying, hey, Russia, you really suck for invading Ukraine. However, that didn't happen because India pulled off what's called here a success of Indian diplomacy that was many did not think would be possible beforehand. And what they did is they built a consensus between everybody, including the United States, to not outright diss Russia, and instead just said, hey, we the G20 are against this war. And I don't even know if they said they're even against the war, but they basically were saying, hey, we want to encourage peace. We would like to see a diplomatic resolution to the Russian-Ukrainian war. In essence, they made a statement that didn't directly attack Russia, didn't even directly blame Russia, but just said, hey, we, the G20, would like to see this war end, and we are encouraging diplomacy on both sides. Many would see that as a big win for Russia and possibly China because they got the statement toned down. But others would say, hey, but the whole G20 did agree to this statement, and it mostly is a win for Prime Minister Modi for having made this even happen. I mean, again, I keep stressing, if you can't get 20 countries to agree to something, you ain't going to get shit done in the United Nations. And Modi somehow pulled it off, perhaps much to the chagrin of the United States, who wanted to see a harsher wording against Russia. So you can interpret it many different ways, but I like this statement here. We are seeing the G20 finally come into its own as a global entity and emerging from the shadow of the G7. So I kind of liked that Modi pulled off this diplomatic coup, not because I'm defending Russia. I don't think they should have invaded Ukraine. I think it was a terrible idea that's costing lives and suffering and making millions of people miserable just for Vladimir Putin's ego. However, it's good for the G20 because it shows that, yes, the United States and the G7 countries don't control the G20. They don't get to come in and say, well, we think this about Russia, so all the rest of you should too. And that didn't happen. So this is a consensus building entity now. And that's a good thing because you got to have consensus. You have to talk to your enemies if you want any sort of resolution about anything. And that's what this group is trying to do. And I think doing it more successfully than most. So I will tease this out here as well. The summit came at a time when Russia and China have been trying to put more emphasis on more like-minded countries, namely the BRICS group. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This would be a test question too. Why did Xi Jinping of China not attend the G20? One, he considers India one of his foremost adversaries / competitors is perhaps a better word. And two, he definitely considers the United States his main global adversary. And so Xi didn't want to go to India. That would show too much respect for India as the host because they're a competitor. And more than that, he didn't want to have to concede anything that the United States would have been doing at that meeting as well. And third, they're pushing away from the G7 and the West and the United States as kind of the center of economic power on planet Earth altogether. So China is really leading the way of pushing for an alternative Eastern global system. I won't say it's different. It's not like the Cold War, communism versus capitalism, but this is more all of the main financial institutions on planet Earth are Western created and Western run. And the global currency standard is a Western global currency standard, the US dollar. And so China, along with Russia, has been for years, if not decades, trying to push for an alternative to the West control of kind of the global financial strings of the world. So that's why Xi probably did not go to India, because he would prefer to see the BRICS countries do more and less emphasis on the G20 and more emphasis on the BRICS as an alternative, even though, again, it's interesting that India's in the BRICS. So we'll have to see where that goes. Anyway, back to Calzone says, could you touch on China's absence at G20? Oh, I just did that. And the nervous talk about their economy woes potentially affecting the world. Boom, just did that. Thank you, Calzone. I got to that without even reading your statement. Yes, one could add perhaps a third or fourth reason why Xi Jinping did not go to the conference is because he's rightly worried about his own economy, which is getting a lot of bad press now. Now, how much truth there is to potential collapse of the Chinese economy? I'm not sure I'm buying a collapse yet, but there might be a recession headed China's way, which will affect the world. So he should have gone to the G20 because it affects all the G20. But he might have wanted to save face from having to be at this meeting with the United States and India, but also to be at home dealing with the perhaps impending economic crisis occurring in China. So that could have been another reason he stayed at home. Calzone says Xi did not attend the last BRICS. I think they sent a diplomatic substitute. I was not aware of that. I have to go look it up. James asks, is India complying with the ICC? That one you'll have to do some groupthink on and find that out. I don't know if India said yes if he I know they didn't say if Vladimir Putin comes to India, we're going to arrest him. I know that was not said. But I think they're an ICC member. So all the ICC members, by the way, are all kind of hesitant. All of them. They're very hesitant to take any stand on if Vladimir Putin comes to their country, they're going to arrest him. No one really wants to do it except the U.S. And Ukraine. But I can't see any other country even wanting to go down that road. But Vladimir Putin and Russia still have to think about it as a possibility that would be wildly embarrassing to them if it occurred. James also jumps on another thing that actually happened at the G20 in the closing statements of the G20. James, too, says, I know Brazil said they wouldn't comply with ICC to arrest Vladimir Putin. That is true. Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, said, well, I'm a BRICS member, and Putin can come to the next BRICS meeting or the next G20 meeting, which I think is in Brazil, and we're not going to arrest him. And he, within an hour, recanted that. He had to step back from it, so I actually have not read enough of the news stories to see what happened there. But apparently that was embarrassing to someone in his country or perhaps himself that he went out on a limb so quickly on that because they're still ICC members. So that was a bit of a faux pas on Lula's part that happened at the tail end of the G20 as well. J.K. Wyatt says, I believe there have also been tensions on the China-India border in the last few years, which may also complicate things. Correct, J.K. This is my favorite World Regions class so far because people are smarter than me in here in this chat room talking about things. As a group, we're learning from each other. Thank you, J.K. That is absolutely correct. In fact, someone in last week's chat room mentioned that China recently redrew borders, claiming more of India. So there's border disputes between China and India on top of all the other competition between these two global powers that I've already since referenced. That might have been another reason. Jake Wrangler says, do you know when the Where's Waldo points will be posted? Oh, so that means their TA has not done that yet. Me and Katie will have to we were supposed to have one of our TAs do it, but she must have gotten confused. So we'll get on that. I've been waiting for those points to be posted so I can do the next Where's Waldo this week. So one is coming. I just got to get last week's graded. So I apologize for the delay on that. Chesapeake says, do you foresee possible travel bans for U.S. citizens to China in the immediate future? No, I don't think so. You never can dispel a tit for tat, but to my knowledge, the U.S. has not banned any particular Chinese leaders or people from coming to the U.S. or anywhere else. So China usually responds in kind. I love that phrase, respond in kind. What respond in kind means is China won't do something unless you do it to them. So until there's some sort of movement on the United States' part to ban particular Chinese leaders, I can't see them doing it to any of our citizens or any of our diplomats or anything like that. But I've been wrong in the past. Let's see. Calzone says China has recently increased exit bans among various international citizens. Yes, I can see China limiting its citizens from leaving, because lots of millionaires in China have been trying to get the hell out of Dodge and take their money with them. So China's not going to allow that for much longer. And it's already started to reel that back. Let's see. And, okay, Tercity and Jake Wrangler are talking to Plaid Katie. Good. Okay. And back to the things, because I see I'm almost out of time already. I guess I need to do a whole talk just on this. But back to our talk on the G20, let me wrap up with a few things that also happened. So as we pointed out, U.S. President Biden was on the defensive after G20 leaders failed to rally around Ukraine. As I suggested, what the heck happened there? As I suggested, no. Continue. That the United States was hoping to rally all the countries to have a more stern warning to Russia and condemnation. That did not occur. However, again, it's perhaps not a bad thing to, instead of directly attacking Russia all the time diplomatically, is to have a little softer stance that you do have a wider group of people agree to. That still shows kind of a united front of no one's really cool with this Ukrainian war without calling out Russia specifically. No one's cool with it. Vladimir Putin needs to hear that. No one's cool with your war, dude. In any way or shape or form, that message can be put out there with more countries agreeing to it, the better it is. Some other things that happen. Oh, I love this one. Some things that happen on the sideline. So I referenced, they talked about cryptocurrency controls. Not much came of that yet. They also talked a little bit about COP28 and global climate stuff. Not much happened about that either. No real agreements or announcements of any kind. However, this did happen. And it happened at the tail end of it on the sidelines. That's another reason why the G20 is kind of cool, in my opinion, because you have leaders. When you get all the leaders in the room, they do side deals. And so these are things that don't typically happen if everybody just stays at home all the time and they don't go out and party a little bit together. So one of the side deals that happened during the meeting was a big transportation project to link India to the Middle East to Europe unveiled. I hadn't heard anything about this until it just got announced at the meeting. And look who's in the picture. And I got the same picture from a different news source, NPR. At the G20, Biden joins forces with India and the Middle East, sidelining China. Mic drop. That's why I love doing podcasts like this, to get you to think more critically and bigger picture about what's going on in the world here. So if you just read an announcement of, there's some transportation corridor hub that's going to happen between India and the Middle East, you might be like, that's cool. I mean, that was my take. I'm like, well, that's cool. Oh, and it's going to also link to Europe? Wow, that's super cool too. Also, it's going to bind India, particularly Saudi Arabia, and you see the the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. They're shaking Joe Biden's hand and Narendra Modi's hand. That has never happened before. In fact, Joe Biden has not met with this dude because the Crown Prince is kind of tainted goods right now. A lot of world leaders don't want a photo op with him, even though Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of good things. He's still credited with assassinating a journalist and doing some seedy other things. So human rights are not the greatest in Saudi Arabia and many of the other Gulf countries. So this is a very interesting turn of events. And I love the way that NPR phrased this because that was my take from it too, especially when I saw the photo op with Joe Biden. And by the way, it's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Crown Prince Salman bin Salman. He pretty much is the king. There is an actual guy that's the king who's an old dude who I guess everybody's just waiting to die. Crown Prince Mohammed is the one in large and in charge and doing all the deals. So he's just waiting in line to become the real king, but he actually already is the real king. So he's kind of a big deal. So you got three major world leaders here in this photo op. And what a great project if it comes to fruition. But think about what it's doing. At a meeting where Russia and China refuse to attend, deals are going down that are pivoting away from China as the central main player in Asia. Now, China is the main player in Asia, to make no bones about that. But this has to be not really a diplomatic coup, because this must have been plans in the making for a while. But it is a bit of a diss to China, because China has this huge thing called the Belt and Road Initiative, where it, as the center, is connecting up all of Asia, all the way reaching the Belt and Road Initiative to Europe, all the way to Southeast Asia, to all parts of Africa. China has been working overtime for 20 years on this initiative to connect in kind of the old Silk Road. In fact, many of us call it that. It's like this is the 21st century Silk Road, where all roads lead to China. They've been working overtime on this. And so for this to happen is a bit of a diss, and you need to understand that's how the world works. So it's no mistake Joe Biden went there. It's no mistake they announced it at this particular meeting that China refused to go to. Bam, bam. That's why it's important. The fact that India is part of it also is important, because that's the next story I kind of liked, was India pushes China to the margins of the G20. And now this kind of encapsulates everything I've said about India already. India, a rising power in and of itself, under Narendra Modi, has done quite well, although there's problems with Narendra Modi's leadership as well. A lot of cultural tension has risen since he's taken over India, but financially they've been doing better, economically they've been doing better, and they are now hosting major world events. This is what big boy countries do, and Narendra Modi has taken India into big boy country status for the first time as a global player. And again, it's no mistake that he wanted this meeting to go off without any hitches, that he worked so hard to get this diplomacy to happen, that all countries would agree to not condemn Russia, that he worked really hard to probably have this whole deal between them, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and Europe, this transportation corridor. This is a big win for him, and he's doing it because China is his major competitor. Again, to me, the most interesting part of this, too, is that India's kind of in this catbird seat. It's kind of in all of the world's institutions now. And I don't know how it's going to pull it off. How is it going to continue to pull off being a main player in the G20 that is much more Western? I won't say focused, but westward leaning. Modi has been increasing ties with the United States. I don't know if you all followed this, but over the summer, Narendra Modi was hosted at the White House for a full, whatever the hell they call it, 5-star diplomatic blitz. Only a few world leaders get this every year, where they roll out the red carpet at the White House. And Narendra Modi got the full treatment. And maybe it was before spring semester ended, but I think it was during the summer. And so in kind, and again, this is where deals happen. And so all of a sudden now, India's leaning more towards doing more business with the United States, even though the United States has nothing to do with this deal. Nothing to do with this deal personally, this linkage between India, the Middle East, and Europe. There's no road to the United States from there, but somehow Joe Biden get his picture taken with it. This is a deal he was helping push through precisely to sideline China a little bit, precisely to say, hey, world, China's not going to run everything. There are alternatives here, and that's what gets me to my final story before I'll tap out. What did Joe Biden do right after closing up the G20 meeting? He went to Vietnam. He went over to Vietnam to basically fully normalize relations politically and economically with Vietnam, a country the United States tried to bomb into the Stone Age 50 years ago. Why would the U.S. do this? For all the same reasons that I just suggested. The United States and other countries are rightly worried. I shouldn't say rightly, that puts in personal judgment. The United States and many countries are worried that a rising China may become too assertive and may become too aggressive, especially around its neighbors, as it continues to grow in wealth. It will continue to grow in military power. It will continue to grow in political power. And so what do big countries do when other big countries are starting to outpace them? You push back. And so Biden's visiting Vietnam is part and parcel for the exact reasons that Biden was promoting a India to Saudi Arabia to Europe corridor. It helps take the sparkle out of China as the crown jewel in the future world economy. And Vietnam still is a huge trading partner of China. Don't make no bones about that, okay? And with Russia, too. Because of the Vietnam War era, Vietnam still has ties to Russia, which supplied them with tons of weaponry during the Vietnam War. And China is still Vietnam's biggest trading partner. But the Joe Biden specifically going there to cement these ties pulls them back a little bit. And by the way, Vietnam wants the United States to partner with them because they are rightly worried about a much more aggressive and assertive China, claiming the entire South China Sea, which is right on their coastline. And they are rightly worried that a more aggressive and assertive China might take them over or take more of the rights away from the shipping lanes that are off their coast. They are very and rightly worried about that stuff. So how do you counter that? Well, become friends with the other big power in the world hood, and that's the United States. And that, my friends, is all the news that's fit for me to print and or talk about at this current juncture. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a little. Give me a shout out if you learned anything at all. Oh, and by the way, it's already 8 minutes after. I'm sorry. If you're in the chat room right now, please email me for your 5 points of extra credit just for hanging out. And I apologize for making this go on so long. And of course, the email password will be G20. The extra credit, 5 points extra credit password is G20. Please email me now. You have until 9:10 to email me. If you watch this video later, it's too late. You only have till 9:10 Eastern Standard Time here in the United States to get those 5 points. Okay. Let me go back and finish up any questions that I might have missed, and I'm sure I missed a few. Let's see, from Calzone says, sounds like competition to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Boom. Thank you, Calzone. You could be teaching this class, my friend. Also, Italy has stated they want to exit BRI. Yes, I read that too. Yeah, there's already some countries that are saying, we're rethinking the whole BRI. That's the Belt and Road Initiative of China. China would be like, what the hell? You know, this is an economic pact. They're building roads, they're building infrastructure, they're building bridges, they're building railroad lines. They're trying to tie what I call the old world together. The old world is Europe, Asia, and Africa. And China is saying, hey, we're just trying to rise. The rising tide lifts all boats. We're trying to build all this great infrastructure that's going to benefit everybody, including you African countries, including you Asian countries, including even Europe, because we buy lots of stuff from you and you buy lots of stuff from us. So China takes this very personally. but a lot, not a lot. Some countries are starting to say, this is kind of big. And we're not sure that we're going to benefit as much from this as China's going to. So, there's always winners and losers, but some countries are already saying, hey, this doesn't add up that we're going to benefit as much as we thought originally jumping in bed with the Belt and Road Initiative. Whereas now this new India to Europe tie, that might get a lot more positive press in European nations in particular. There's more of a shared cultural heritage, shared historical heritage. The English language is one thing alone you should think about of like, oh, that's much easier to do business there. And India is an up-and-comer. So there's a lot of potential investment in India and a lot of potential exports from India that could benefit both Middle Eastern countries, African countries, and certainly European countries. So it's looking like that might be more interesting right now. The BRI looks kind of big. Sorry, Calzone, I was stealing your thunder without even seeing your comments. JK back in the Hizzle saying, my info may be dated, but isn't India still buying Russian oil? Yes. You're not dated. And meanwhile, shaking hands with Biden at the same time. Also correct. They do really seem to be winning. Oh, and landing on the moon. Oh, thank you, JK. I love this group of humans. JK, thanks for the reminder. India just successfully put a rover on the moon 2 weeks ago. And they also just launched a mission to the sun, although I'm not sure what you call it. An exploratory scientific something being shot to the sun to collect data. They just successfully did that too. And while they did it, a week earlier, Russia's probe to the moon crashed. And I can't remember, China's got a great space program too, but they've not done anything recently that's caught the international attention the way that India just did. So yeah, more competition between China and India. And JK is pointing out correctly, yeah, they are buying Russian oil because it makes them, it's a good deal for them economically. It helps their economy. And they are shaking hands with President Biden and forming up an economic deal with Europe and the Middle East because it benefits them economically. And so India is really kind of like, yeah, they're kind of winning right now. It's interesting. They're winning for now. I mean, times change and catastrophes strike, but India's doing quite well this semester. That's why I think maybe the survey I'm going to send out to you about what region I should do a brand new lecture on, I'm really hoping you guys vote for India. I'm kind of feeling India. I'm feeling India this semester. To head over to, what's the only Indian restaurant we have in our town? I've forgotten the name. It's right across the street. For 5 points, what's the Indian restaurant right across, the only big Indian restaurant in our town? Let's see. So JK, your info was not dated. You're spot on all of your assessments and facts. Tutef learned at least one thing. Rod Botto definitely learned stuff. M Dog learned some stuff. Plaid Katie learned. Jin enjoyed listening. Vikram Tawari in the Hizzle saying, I did. Thank you for joining, Vikram. Thank you for sharing the knowledge. I enjoyed listening. I always appreciate you attending, Vikram. Let's see. I think I'm caught up. So there's some people getting banned. Plaid Katie's banning some people. I don't know what the Childless Vic. Oh, I'm not even sure I like that screen name. Let's see. Second space race from Blue Subaru. Oh, my friend, the second space race is on. Calzone just picked up 5 points for India Garden. But you know what? Mike Madical's also going to pick up 5 points for Hamro Kitchen. You know what? Sadie and Is Blue Subaru, you also get 5 points. Thanks for staying way past. So Calzone, Mike Madical, Sadie, and Blue Subaru, email me again saying India Garden and Hamro Kitchen. So Mike Madical, thank you for bringing up Hamro Kitchen. You probably don't know about this, students, or even lifelong residents of Blacksburg or returning students like Vikram Tiwari next time he comes into town. There's a brand new sheriff in town for Asian cuisine. I'm not getting paid to say this, by the way. Hamro Kitchen. It's where the old, not China Inn. Was it China Inn? It's where the old China Inn was, across from the public library there in town, just up from the police station, if you know where that's at. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. None of you know that. But Hamro Kitchen was that little strip mall where there was a dry cleaner and China Inn and a music store. And Hamro Kitchen is a Nepalese-focused restaurant, the first of its kind in our town, to my knowledge, and it is quite good. So visit Hamro's Kitchen and tell them World Regions sent you. Melted Ice Cream, just give the shout out. The chicken momo at Hamro is good. Bam. All the momos. They have a whole page of momos. I didn't even know what the hell a momo was until I went to Hamro's Kitchen. But you're right, Melted Ice Cream. That chicken momo is banging. India Garden still puts up a mighty fine buffet as well. I only brought this up, and you guys got some more extra credit because I was having a play on words there where I'm like, I'm feeling India. I'm feeling India this semester for a lecture. I'm feeling Indian. Now I'm hungry. Now I got to go to India Garden. How did I forget the name of India Garden when I said India 20 times? Well, that's because I'm tired and I'm old. But anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in to, once more, losing an hour and a quarter of your life to the online live office hours for World Regional Geography, aka World Regions, here at Virginia Tech. Hope you learned some good stuff. If you would like a quiz on this, I guess I could put together a quiz since we almost did a kind of a lecture. But you all send me facts that you learned from this, or things that I said were a quiz question, and I'll give you even a few more points if you write some quiz questions for me. So if you'd like a quiz on this for even more points, send me some info on what you learned, and I'll be able to make some good quiz questions for a quiz. But for now, as always, have a great Monday night, a fantastic week here at Virginia Tech, and a fantastic life, period. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week, or maybe Friday, but we'll definitely see you next Monday for another edition of Online Live Office Hours. Same plaid time, same plaid Twitch channel. But for now, as always, a party on.